My name is Abigail, and I used to think that being the dependable one in the family was a badge of honor. But let me ask you something. What would you do if your own mother told you flights are $1, $200 each? If you can't afford it, stay behind and then used your credit card to buy 4 business class tickets for everyone but you. That's not just betrayal. That's a wake-up call with your name on it. And mine came wrapped in debt silence and fake family loyalty. After years of sacrifice, they didn't even see me as a person, just a wallet with a heartbeat. What I did next wasn't loud or vengeful. It was surgical, precise, final. Before I begin, I want to ask you, where are you watching from and how old are you? Don't forget to subscribe to TVH Stories for more stories that speak truth to pain and power. I still remember the sweat trickling down my back as I peeled off my scrubs after a brutal 12-hour night shift. The hospital was short-staffed again, and I had barely sat down all night. I was standing in the kitchen reheating leftover soup when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was my mom calling on speakerphone as always, her voice echoing through the tiny apartment I could barely afford. "Flights are $1, $200 each," she said casually. "If you can't afford it, just stay behind." I didn't even respond at first. I just stood there holding my bowl, watching the steam rise and disappear, wondering when, exactly, I became the disposable one in my own family. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out, not by a long shot. The way she said it, light, almost cheerful, like it wasn't the sixth time in 2 years that I was being excluded from something that was supposed to be for all of us. A family trip to Maui. My parents, my sister Kayla, her husband Derek. A week of warm sand cocktails and sunsets. No mention of me unless I was the one footing the bill. And still, even then, I didn't argue. I just nodded, said I understood, and told her I hoped they had a good time. Because that's what I did. I swallowed it all, every slight, every ignored call, every manipulation, and smiled. She threw in something like, "We deserve this." It's been a rough year for everyone, as if I wasn't part of that everyone. As if I hadn't pulled 3 doubles last week alone, or loaned Kayla $2,500 when Derek got laid off, or paid Dad's ER deductible when his blood pressure went through the roof. I always helped. I always came through. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. I was the dependable one, the nurse with the steady job, the one with no kids, no husband, no distractions. And because of that, they treated me like an endless resource until I didn't feel like a daughter anymore, just a backup plan with a pulse. I stood there in that kitchen spoon halfway to my mouth, feeling invisible. Not angry, not yet. Just hollow. Like a ghost in my own life. That call could have broken me, but instead, it began something I hadn't expected: clarity. I finished my soup in silence, washed the bowl, and went to bed. I didn't cry. I didn't vent. I just let the weight of it settle like dust on old furniture. I had no idea that less than 24 hours later, everything would change, not because of a fight, but because of a ping on my phone and a name I didn't expect to see. The next night, I was brushing my teeth when I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a familiar buzz, the kind that usually meant an alert from my credit card app. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was another subscription charge or a payment reminder. But when I wiped the toothpaste from my mouth and checked the screen, my stomach turned. 4 charges, each for $1, $200. Merchant Pacific Airways. Description: business class airfare. I blinked, thinking maybe it was some kind of glitch. But as I opened the app and scrolled down, my chest tightened. The passenger names were listed: Derek B., Kayla B., Sandra M., William M. Not a single charge for me, just my family, my card. No call, no heads up, nothing. My fingers went numb as I stared at the screen. I didn't even know how to process what I was seeing. They hadn't invited me. They told me I couldn't afford it. Then they used my credit card to pay for their luxury travel. Not economy, not group discount fares, business class. I didn't get a window seat. I didn't even get a seat. I just got the bill. That's when the numbness faded, replaced by a slow, simmering heat in my chest. My jaw clenched. My hand shook. But I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I tapped dispute all. Then I locked the account. Quiet. Cold. Controlled. They weren't going to drain me again, not this time. My mind jumped back to every time I said yes. Yes, you can borrow my card. Yes, I'll cover that emergency. Yes, I'll co-sign, I'll loan, I'll spot you just this once. But none of those yeses mattered when it came time for them to treat me like part of the family. I wasn't invited. I was exploited. The truth hit me like a truck. I wasn't their sister or daughter in those moments. I was their safety net. And they didn't even have the decency to ask. They just assumed that I'd say nothing, that I'd cover it like always, that I'd clean up the mess and thank them for the opportunity. I set my phone down on the counter and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, older than my 34 years. There were shadows under my eyes, not from age but from exhaustion, the kind that comes from being stretched too thin for too long. For a brief moment, I wondered if I was overreacting, if maybe this was just another misunderstanding. But then I saw Kayla's name again, and Derek's. And I remembered the last time Derek used my car and doubled my insurance. The last time Kayla asked for rent help and ghosted me. This wasn't new. It was just the first time I noticed how deep it had gone. I went to bed that night with my phone on silent and my heart wide awake. I wasn't sure what I would do next, but for the first time in years, I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't ignore it. I wouldn't make excuses. I wouldn't let them pretend this was okay, because it wasn't. It never was. The next morning, my apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of pipes in the wall. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching the steam curl above the mug, still unsure of how to feel. Not sad. Not angry in the way they might expect. I felt done. Empty. Like something had quietly snapped inside me and I didn't need to raise my voice to know it was broken. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Kayla. Why is nothing paid for 5 words sent from an airport check-in line, most likely typed with a manicure I'd probably helped pay for? No greeting. No question mark. Just entitlement in pixels. I stared at the message for a long time. I imagined her standing there in line, her brows furrowed, scanning her phone as if the world had betrayed her. As if I had. For a brief second, I wondered what I was supposed to feel. Guilt? Obligation? Panic? But there was only silence in my chest. I picked up my phone, typed out a short reply, and hit send. What you said, I stayed behind. That was it. No explanation, no fight. Just a mirror held up to her own words. I didn't owe her more than that. I had finally learned that silence sometimes said everything. Then I did something I never thought I would. I opened a new tab on my laptop and typed in last-minute getaways. I didn't look at prices. I didn't check calendars or budgets. I found a place quiet, small, with warm air and soft waves. A 1-bedroom rental near the coast. Nothing fancy, just somewhere that didn't smell like hospital sanitizer and disappointment. I booked it. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a bag, locked my apartment, and left. It wasn't about revenge. Not in the way they'd expect. It wasn't some dramatic gesture or emotional protest. It was freedom. My kind. I left no note. I didn't answer the calls that started coming in that afternoon, first from Dad, then Kayla, then Mom. They stacked up on my screen like missed appointments I no longer had to keep. I turned off notifications, threw my phone into my bag, and turned up the music in my car as I drove. Every mile I put between me and that life felt like shedding another layer of weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. When I arrived at the rental, I didn't unpack right away. I stood on the deck and let the ocean air hit my face. I could still hear my mom's voice in my head. If you can't afford it, stay behind. And now here I was, behind them, far from them, and yet finally ahead in every way that mattered. I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't covering their mistakes. I wasn't the dependable daughter today. I was just me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. It didn't start with the tickets. That was just the final straw, the one with a receipt I could finally point to. The truth is, they had been taking from me for years, only it never looked like theft. It looked like Kayla borrowing my credit card for a temporary emergency when she needed a $600 dress for her engagement party. You work in healthcare? You don't even dress up? She laughed as if that justified the charge. She promised to pay me back by the end of the month. She never did. Then it was Dad asking me to co-sign a loan so they could remodel the kitchen. It's not even for us, he said. It's for resale value. One day you'll inherit it. The house was refinanced twice after that. I never saw a dime. The funds went to Derek's second failed business, something involving drop shipping and motivational videos. Meanwhile, I was clocking 50-hour weeks trying to cover my rent, my loans, my car payments, and pretending it was all okay. I remembered getting pneumonia last winter. I was burning up with fever, shivering under 3 blankets, too weak to cook. I called my mom, voice hoarse, and asked if she could bring me some soup. She sighed and said she had promised Kayla she'd watch the kids while Kayla got her nails done. You understand? She said gently. I always did. I always understood when they forgot my birthday, when they left me out of plans, when they needed something and framed it as love. I was the easy one, the one who wouldn't push back, who wouldn't make them uncomfortable by asking for reciprocity. Then there was Derek crashing my car. I had let him borrow it when his was in the shop. He rear-ended someone and my insurance doubled. He handed back the keys with a shrug and said, "That's what insurance is for, right?" He never even offered to help with the new premium. I remember standing there stunned, wondering if he even knew what he had just cost me. But of course he did. He just didn't care. Because I had trained them not to care. I had trained them to believe that my help was endless, that my silence was consent. Every moment I thought was a one-time thing, a small act of love, a gesture for family. I started seeing them for what they were. Debits, withdrawals, tolls taken on my energy, my finances, my self-worth. I had been bled slowly over years until I didn't even feel it anymore. Like boiling a frog, the water getting warmer 1 degree at a time until the damage was irreversible. I was the frog. Until that airline charge, the one I didn't authorize, the one I could dispute, the one that lit something in me I hadn't felt in years, the will to fight. Not with shouting or tears, but with boundaries, with silence, with action. The week before the Hawaii trip was when everything finally came into focus. I had just finished another overnight shift blood vomit paperwork, and a patient who tried to hit me when I told him he couldn't leave with his IV still in. I was standing outside the hospital waiting for the sun to rise when Kayla texted, "Can you move your payday up? Mom wants to book hotels and we're short. Move my payday up." Like I was their personal payroll department. "What payday?" I texted back. "Short for what?" She replied with a gif of hula dancers and a string of emojis, a palm tree, a hibiscus, and a woman in a red dress dancing. "Family trip," she wrote. I called Mom. "Kayla said you need help with hotels," I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, sweetie, don't worry about that," she chirped. "Everything's already booked. We just needed a bit of a cushion to upgrade to business class. You know how bad Derek's knees are." My jaw tightened. "So, you're asking me to help pay for the upgrade on a trip I'm not even invited to?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then her tone shifted, cool and clipped. "Look, Abigail, if you wanted to come, you could have said something. But flights are $1, $200 each. If you can't afford that, maybe it's best you sit this one out. No hard feelings." That sentence echoed in my mind long after I hung up. Not just the words, but the way she said them. like I was a burden, like my presence would be an inconvenience to their vacation aesthetic. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about inclusion. It was about how they saw me an accessory to their needs, useful only when they were in crisis. The rest of the time, I was a shadow in the background, unseen, uninvited, unvalued. That night, the alert came through on my credit card. 4 business class tickets, not even booked in my name. That was when the numbness cracked wide open and something hotter bled through anger, yes, but also clarity. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my budget spreadsheet. I had $327 in my checking account. My student loan sat at $14,200. My 6-year-old car had 119,000 miles. I hadn't taken a vacation since college. Meanwhile, Derek was sipping champagne in an airport lounge with my name on the receipt. And still, they had the audacity to text me from the check-in line like I had somehow failed them. That's when I saw it for what it was. Not a family. A system. One I'd been conditioned to support in silence. One that only functioned when I didn't speak up. So I did the one thing they never saw coming. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending. I stopped apologizing. I simply replied, "What you said, I stayed behind." And that's exactly what I did. The morning after they landed in Maui, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, voicemails, a flurry of texts. First from Kayla, then from Mom, then Dad chiming in with one-liners like, "We need to talk," and "This isn't funny." I ignored every one of them. I sat on the balcony of my rented cottage with my feet propped up on a wooden railing, coffee in hand, the ocean a soft hum in the distance. I had no guilt, just air in my lungs and quiet in my head. But then came the one message that flipped a switch I didn't even know was still connected. It was from Dad. "You were supposed to help. You always do." That sentence cut deeper than any accusation, not because it was angry, because it was honest. In his mind, I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource, a guaranteed fallback plan. The person who kept the machine running without needing oil or rest. I read it again and again, letting the weight of that assumption settle like concrete in my chest. That was the moment it all snapped into place. They hadn't just crossed a line. They'd redrawn the map to erase me from the center entirely, keeping only the parts they could use. I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank document. I didn't cry. I didn't vent to a friend. I started writing. Not a letter. Not a rant. An invoice. It was the most clinical thing I could do. If they wanted to treat me like a financial institution, I'd respond in kind. I titled it Reimbursement Request, Family Debts and Unauthorized Charges. Then I itemized every cent I could remember. The $600 dress Kayla borrowed my card for. The $2,500 loan I gave her and Derek when he got laid off. The $800 I paid out of pocket for Dad's MRI deductible when his insurance hit a cap. Grocery bills Mom forgot to Venmo back. The business class tickets. The late fees and interest that followed. Line after line, I documented the slow bleed. It came out to $7,870. I stared at that number not in disbelief, but with quiet validation. It wasn't just a number. It was my silence given form. I formatted it, cleanly exported it as a PDF, and attached it to an email addressed to our family group chat. Subject line, regarding recent charges. The body of the message was short. Per your belief that family supports one another, please see the attached document outlining financial support extended over the past 24 months. I will no longer be subsidizing family expenses. Full repayment is expected within 30 business days. Beyond that, I will escalate unauthorized charges to my credit provider. No further financial interaction will be permitted moving forward. I didn't send it right away. I read it again out loud twice. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't being spiteful. I was being exact. I hit send. The reaction came fast. Within minutes of hitting send, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. At first, it was Kayla. "Are you serious?" she wrote. "What kind of person sends an invoice to their own family?" I didn't reply. A few seconds later, Mom chimed in. "This is hurtful and unnecessary, Abigail. We don't treat each other like this." Then Dad, like clockwork. "We raised you better than this." That was the one that made me laugh out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly delusional. The truth was, they didn't raise me. I raised myself. While they were off managing Derek's failures or playing favorites, I was figuring out how to survive. While they were drawing lines around what they called family, I was the one keeping the lights on. I left the messages unanswered. I needed space between their chaos and my clarity. Instead, I printed the invoice. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk right next to the photo of me at graduation, cap tilted, smile, wide shoulders, already heavy with the weight of student debt and family expectation. That invoice wasn't about money, it was about acknowledgement. A line in the sand. Proof that I saw what they'd been doing all along, and I was done pretending otherwise. That evening, I opened my apartment windows wide and let the breeze in. I made pasta with garlic and olive oil, lit a candle, played some old jazz records, and tried to reclaim a piece of myself that had been buried beneath responsibility for far too long. But peace has a short lifespan when you're dealing with people who mistake access for entitlement. The next morning, Dad showed up at my door. I didn't open it. I watched him through the peephole Hawaiian shirt still wrinkled from the trip, face tight with frustration, as if he'd come to fix something with the sheer force of being the father. He knocked once, twice, then louder. "Abigail," he called open the door. "We need to talk." I didn't move. I let him stand there for 7 full minutes. I know because I timed it. Eventually he left. No note, no apology, just silence. That silence was a gift. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. I didn't feel guilt. I felt like someone who finally knew where she stood, and more importantly, where she refused to stand anymore. Later that night, I got a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "You really hurt your father today. He flew back early just to speak to you after everything we've done for you." I saved that message. Not for sentiment, but for evidence. Because I wasn't just done with them using my money. I was done letting them rewrite the story to make me the villain. They wanted to keep playing the same script. But I had changed the ending. By the time I woke up the next morning, the family group chat had turned into a war zone. Dozens of messages, long paragraphs, passive-aggressive one-liners and emojis meant to soften cruel words. Kayla was furious. "You're being completely unfair," she typed. "We needed that upgrade. Derek's knees swell when he flies economy." She followed it up with, "Do you realize what you've done? We couldn't even check in properly. Had to downgrade and pay out of pocket. Do you know how embarrassing that was?" I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have something to say. I had too much. And none of it was meant to be typed with a polite smiley face at the end. Then came the guilt grenades. Mom family is supposed to be there for each other. I almost laughed. The same woman who once left me alone sick with pneumonia because she had a nail appointment for Kayla was now trying to lecture me on family duty. I didn't respond. Not yet. I wanted to see just how far they'd go when they couldn't manipulate me through money anymore. The next text came from Dad, and it hit like a familiar slap. "You need to grow up and stop playing the victim." "We had no choice. We didn't know the card would decline. You were supposed to help. You always do." That phrase again. Like helping was in my job description. Like I'd missed a deadline at work. Like my refusal to be drained financially was a personal betrayal. I sat with that line for a long time, longer than I probably should have. Not because I was considering changing my mind. I was considering something else, something that had been sitting in the back of my brain for years. They thought this was just a phase, a tantrum. They thought if they shouted loud enough or guilted hard enough, I'd come back to being the agreeable daughter with a generous credit limit and a quiet mouth. But I was done. Not just hurt. Not just disappointed. I was finished. I realized in that moment that they didn't fear losing me. They feared losing access to me. And now they had. So I finally typed a response not to the group, just to Kayla. One sentence. You mean like when I paid your rent for 8 months and you never paid me back? I hit send. Then I blocked her. No dramatic speech. No final warning. Just done. I left mom and dad unblocked not out of grace, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see just how deep the delusion ran. They didn't disappoint. Within hours, mom was calling again, leaving tear-filled voicemails. Dad followed with texts filled with condescension dressed up as wisdom. You're embarrassing the family. You'll regret this someday. This isn't how we raised you. That last one made me pause. Because it was wrong. They didn't raise me. I raised myself through overdraft fees, skipped meals, and sleepless nights. And now, for the first time, I was standing. 2 days later, I was folding laundry when I heard another knock at the door. Not frantic, just firm. I didn't need to look through the peephole, I knew it was them. Dad's voice followed. Abigail, we're not leaving until we talk. I didn't answer. I stood in the hallway holding a towel, heart steady, face blank. They knocked again. Mom's voice came next. Please, honey, we came all this way. We just want to clear the air. I kept folding. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I no longer cared enough to perform the role they'd written for me. After a few minutes, they gave up and slid something under the door. A manila envelope. I waited until I heard the elevator doors close before picking it up. Inside were printed receipts, a typed note from Dad about misunderstandings, a partially filled out repayment plan, and a post-it with, "Let's move forward, okay," in Mom's handwriting. No apology, no acknowledgement, just documentation. A negotiation from people who had stolen from me but still expected to dictate the terms of peace. That night, I sat at my desk, the envelope beside me, the invoice still pinned above. I replayed everything, every ignored cry for help, every favor they forgot to return, every time they told me I was overreacting. Then I opened my email and resent the invoice, this time with a subject line that read, "Formal follow-up, unresolved." I attached a scanned copy of the receipts they had submitted alongside notes pointing out what was missing: interest, late fees, emotional labor. I didn't just want the money. I wanted them to realize they couldn't buy silence anymore. The next day, another voicemail came through. Dad's voice was sharper now. This stunned Abigail, freezing the credit, sending an invoice. It's spiteful. We are your family. I played it twice just to hear the tone change halfway through. Spiteful. He called what I did spiteful after they drained me dry without consent. Then he said, "We didn't think it would be an issue." That line echoed in my chest. No, they didn't. Because I had trained them to believe I was endless. That night, I sat on my couch, stared out the window, and finally allowed myself to say it aloud. They didn't raise me. I had spent years thinking that being the reliable daughter made me strong. But what it really did was keep me small. It kept me tied to people who never asked what I needed, only what I could give. Every meal I skipped so Kayla could make rent, every extra shift I picked up so Mom could keep her vacation plans. Every ounce of myself I had given freely was never enough to buy basic respect. When people show you what they expect from you, believe them. They expected me to stay quiet. They expected me to clean up after their choices. They expected me to apologize for finally drawing a line. But I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't their silent donor. I was someone they never expected to fight back. That's why they were so scared. They showed up again the next day. Same spot in the hallway. Same knock, firm but insistent. This time they brought faces softened by exhaustion. Dad looked stiff, arms crossed over his chest like he was preparing for a courtroom statement. Mom clutched a folder, her eyes darting around nervously. I opened the door not because I wanted to hear them out, but because I wanted them to see that I wasn't afraid anymore. I stood in the doorway, arms relaxed at my sides. I didn't ask them in. "You need to talk to us?" Mom said, her voice trembling. "No," I replied calmly. "I really don't." Dad took a step forward. "This is going too far, Abigail. The credit freeze, the invoice, the threats to report us. It's spiteful." I held his gaze. "You used my name and card to buy tickets for a vacation I wasn't even invited to," I said. "That wasn't family. That was theft." Mom's lips quivered. "We didn't think it'd be an issue. You always help." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break down. I looked them both in the eye and said, "Because you trained me to. Since I was 22, you've treated me like a walking debit card. I helped because I thought it meant I was good. That saying no would make me selfish. But I'm done being the good daughter." Dad's jaw tightened. "Don't talk to your mother like that," he growled. My stare didn't flinch. "No. Don't talk to me like I owe you something. I work double shifts while Kayla and Derek drink mimosas at LAX on my dime. I paid your hospital bills while you whispered behind my back that I was selfish. And now you're here not to apologize, but to manage the fallout. That's not love. That's damage control." He stepped closer again, trying to reassert control the way he used to, with size, with tone, with presence. "You think this makes you strong?" he said, voice low and bitter. Turning your back on your family, I shook my head slowly. "No. But it makes me free." I closed the door, not in a dramatic slam, not with rage, just a quiet, steady movement, like sealing a letter that didn't need to be read again. The lock clicked into place behind me, and I exhaled like I hadn't breathed in years. No pounding followed, no shouting, just stillness. Later that night, I got a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was soft, almost hollow. "I don't know who you are anymore." I replayed it once, then again, and found myself smiling, because she was right. I wasn't the person they used to walk all over. I wasn't the one who said yes through clenched teeth. I wasn't the peacekeeper who bled herself out to keep others warm. That door stayed shut. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where the key was, right in my pocket. And I wasn't handing it over again. 2 days passed. No calls, no texts, not a whisper from the group chat. The silence wasn't comforting, it was surgical. Precise. Like they'd retreated to regroup and plan their next angle. I didn't relax. I braced. And sure enough, it came. An email alert from my bank flagged an attempted charge on my old frozen credit card. Someone had tried to rent a car in Maui. I didn't need to guess. I already knew. Derek. I called the bank's fraud department and confirmed it within 5 minutes. The charge matched his ID and name exactly. The same man who shrugged off crashing my car now thought he could still ride on my dime, even after everything. "Would you like to press charges?" the bank rep asked me gently. I didn't. Not yet. But I had them document it. I asked for a copy of the fraud report and had it emailed to me. Subject line evidence, in case they escalate. I wasn't just drawing boundaries now. I was building a paper trail. Because people like Derek didn't stop when you said no, they stopped when consequences made it hurt. Later that night, a message came from an unknown number. "We're stranded. Are you seriously going to leave your family like this after all we've done for you, Kayla?" I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen, then screenshot it and filed it away in a new folder I'd started, Family Patterns I Won't Repeat. There was no question about whether I was being harsh. There was only relief that I was finally seeing the truth clearly. Every attempt they made to guilt me, to pull me back in, only reminded me of the imbalance I had tolerated for too long. I remembered every time I bailed Kayla out while she rolled her eyes at my frugal choices. I remembered watching Dad buy Derek a new laptop while telling me they couldn't help with my last tuition payment. I remembered Mom saying, "You're so independent. We don't worry about you," like that was a compliment instead of an excuse to neglect me. I sat down that night and looked at the invoice again. Then I opened the fraud report and stapled it to the back. I printed copies of both and slipped them into a folder I labeled with a single word: boundaries. It felt cold, maybe even vengeful. But it wasn't. It was necessary. This wasn't about hurting them. It was about finally stopping the hurt they caused me. They thought they could drain me indefinitely because I was the nice one. But I'd learned that nice without boundaries is just an invitation for abuse. And now the invitation was revoked. For good. Derek's attempted theft wasn't a surprise. It was a reminder that nothing changes until you make it, and I was done waiting for anyone else to change. I was changing it myself. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed again, this time with a Facebook message request. I almost ignored it. My inbox had become a graveyard for emotional landmines, but the name made me pause. Marissa, Derek's ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in years, not since their divorce turned messy, and she disappeared out of state. Last I heard, she'd started a new life, far away, law degree in hand, ambition intact. She was smart, sharp, and allergic to nonsense. She was also the only person who ever saw what I went through and didn't try to justify it. Her message was simple. "Hey Abigail, sorry to pop in like this, but you might want to talk." That was it. No context, no emojis, no small talk. I stared at the message for a few minutes, then typed back, "Is this about Derek?" She responded with a thumbs up, then a file. A PDF. I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside were screenshots, bank transfers, email chains, a spreadsheet with names I recognized: Mom, Dad, Derek, all tied to a joint family emergency fund. Except it wasn't being used for emergencies. It was being funneled into Derek's personal crypto account. High-risk garbage coins, fake consulting payments, and a few Vegas hotel charges thrown in for good measure. In one thread, Mom begged Marissa not to report anything. In another, Dad wrote, "We'll fix this. Abigail doesn't need to know." I sat there in the dark, the only light coming from my laptop screen, reading those words over and over. Abigail doesn't need to know. So they knew. All of them. They knew he was lying, stealing, gambling with money that wasn't his. And instead of stopping him or warning me, they protected him. Because he was the broken one. The baby. The one who always got another chance. I wasn't surprised. I was tired. I called Marissa. She picked up on the second ring. "Wasn't sure you'd even want to talk," she said. But I couldn't just sit on this anymore. I know what it's like. They used to guilt me the same way. I asked her why now. She paused, then said, "Because you're doing what I never did. You're walking away. And I thought you deserved to know the truth before they try to twist it." That night, I printed every page she sent me, stapled them neatly, placed them behind the invoice and fraud report, and filed them under the same folder, boundaries. But this wasn't just a file now. This was a case, a history, a truth I could hold in my hands when they tried to make me doubt my own memory. Marissa wasn't just Derek's ex anymore. She was proof that someone else saw what I saw, lived it, and walked away too. And she didn't have to come back into my life. She chose to. Not out of revenge, but out of solidarity. And that meant more to me than any apology my family never gave. For the first time, I wasn't standing alone. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, lights off, Marissa's file open in front of me. The words blurred, but their meaning never left. For years, I had suspected something was off. The unexplained expenses, the sudden financial emergencies, the way they closed ranks whenever Derek got into trouble. I just never had the receipts until now. Now I had emails transfers please from my own mother asking someone else to hide the truth from me. Abigail doesn't need to know, she wrote. Not out of protection, but out of fear. Fear that I'd finally cut them off if I saw the full picture. They were right. The Hawaii tickets weren't the beginning. They were just the latest chapter. A symptom of a sickness that had metastasized long ago. I remembered every time they praised me for being low maintenance, for not needing much. It was never a compliment. It was a justification. The truth was they counted on me needing nothing, so they could give everything to someone else. I wasn't the child they nurtured. I was the scaffolding they built their excuses on. I thought about the house they claimed I'd inherit, the kitchen they remodeled using money I helped them get. The same kitchen Derek held court in while I sat quietly during family dinners, my opinions dismissed, my presence optional. The house had been refinanced, then drained again and again, and no one told me. No one even considered it necessary. As the sun started to rise, I reached for the envelope my parents had slid under my door, the one with receipts. The one they thought would make it all go away. I placed it next to Marissa's file. The contrast was stunning. One was curated, incomplete, sanitized. The other was raw, messy, undeniable. One was a Band-Aid. The other was an autopsy. I sat with it until the light outside was sharp enough to expose everything. Then I opened my laptop, drafted a new email, and attached all the documents, my original invoice, the fraud report, and now Marissa's full archive. I sent it to the family group thread with a short message, supplemental evidence attached. This isn't just about a charge. This is about a pattern. Then, without hesitation, I copied Aunt Linda, Mom's older sister, who had once warned me gently but firmly. Be careful, sweetie. Your parents love hard, but they protect Derek harder. Just for good measure, I created a redacted version and sent it anonymously to Dad's HR department at his firm. Not with vengeance in mind, but with clarity. If his job involved handling client funds while hiding family fraud, they deserved to know. I wasn't trying to burn bridges. I was trying to stop setting myself on fire just to keep others warm. Then I shut my laptop, exhaled, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: clean. The kind of clean that doesn't come from winning, but from finally refusing to lose on someone else's terms. The truth was out, and for once, it didn't belong to them. The group chat exploded within hours. Kayla's messages came first, loud and fast. What is this? Are you insane? You're going to destroy the family over some misunderstanding? She threw every tactic she knew at me: deflection, outrage, then desperation. You need to take this down. You don't know what you've done. I didn't reply. Let her stew in the truth. For once, I wasn't the one explaining, defending, or begging to be heard. Then came Mom. This is hurtful, Abigail. You've embarrassed your father. You've gone too far. No apology. Just shame wrapped in fragile concern. And finally, Dad clipped, and cold. We raised you better than this. That phrase again. It hit like a rusted nail. I almost laughed. They hadn't raised me. They had used me, leaned on me, and expected me to feel honored by the weight. But I carried that weight alone while they protected Derek from consequences and painted him as the victim every time he failed. No one acknowledged the content of the files. No one denied the charges or explained the bank transfers. No one challenged the facts. Instead, they attacked me for surfacing them. That told me everything I needed to know. They didn't care about right or wrong, only about control. And I had taken that away. 3 days later, I got an email alert. Dad's profile had quietly been removed from his company's website. I refreshed the page twice just to be sure. He was gone. No announcement, no press. Just a quiet deletion from the staff directory. I didn't cheer. I didn't smirk. I just noted it. Another crack in the image they worked so hard to uphold while demanding silence from the one person who kept them afloat. I thought I'd feel guilt. Maybe some pang of regret for throwing the first punch they couldn't ignore, but I didn't. I felt still, not triumphant, not vindictive, just still, like I had cleared a room full of smoke and could finally breathe without coughing up someone else's lies. Around that time, I started going on walks again. Long ones. No phone. Just me, the sidewalk, and my own thoughts. I stopped by a bookstore for the first time in ages. Bought a journal. Not to vent, but to track what my life looked like without constant emotional debt. I cooked. I slept better. I played music in the morning. I began therapy not to fix myself, but to understand why I tolerated so much for so long. The fallout didn't define me. The freedom did. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was in the quiet decisions, the emails sent without fanfare. The calls, I didn't return the texts. I didn't defend myself against. I didn't slam any more doors. I simply stopped opening them. And in that silence, I reclaimed something they never thought I would ask for myself. The silence didn't last. It never does with people who see boundaries as threats instead of necessities. A few weeks after the fallout, I received a handwritten envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable Kayla's. I debated tossing it, burning it even. But curiosity won. Inside were 5 pages of manipulation dressed as apology. Paragraphs about how we all make mistakes, how you took it too far, and of course, Mom cries every day. She ended with, "We're family. Nothing changes that." And that's when I realized she was right. We were family. That's what made this worse. Because it wasn't strangers who exploited me. It wasn't coworkers or acquaintances who drained me dry and told me I was ungrateful for noticing. It was the people who claimed to love me. The people who used that word family as both shield and weapon. I folded the letter, placed it on top of the Marissa file, and locked the drawer. A few days later, another envelope arrived. No note, no card. Just a check. $7,870. The exact amount from the invoice. No explanation, no acknowledgement. Just silence with a $sign. I didn't cash it. Not right away. I pinned it to the wall above my desk next to a quote I had scribbled in my journal the week before. "You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about being seen, about having my pain acknowledged, about choosing myself. Marissa messaged me again soon after. She had gone a step further, sent the same file of Derek's financial misconduct to a family law attorney and a contact in the state fraud office. Derek was now under formal investigation for wire fraud and misappropriation of family funds. Apparently, he hadn't just stolen from me. He had also skimmed from Mom and Dad's retirement savings. The same people who had once told me, "He's just going through a rough patch. Don't make things worse." The irony didn't escape me. The people who demanded silence to preserve family honor were now unraveling because of the very secrets they buried. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Not out for revenge, just finished being their scapegoat. I spoke to Marissa one last time on the phone. I thanked her. She paused and said, "Don't thank me. I should have done it sooner. But you gave me the courage to finally draw a line too. We weren't friends. We weren't close. But we had something stronger in that moment, a shared understanding of what it costs to keep pretending." She had once been trapped in their orbit too, and now she was helping tear down the illusion. That evening, I opened my window again. Not to let anything in, but to let it all go. The guilt. The years of silent suffering. The lie that keeping peace meant keeping quiet. I didn't owe anyone my silence anymore, and I sure as hell didn't owe them my life. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I slammed the door on my past and refused to reopen it. It didn't feel like defiance anymore. It felt like alignment. Like my life had finally stopped twisting itself into unnatural shapes to accommodate people who didn't care if I broke in the process. I had started sleeping through the night again, not because the noise had stopped, but because I had stopped listening for it. No more guilt-laced voicemails, no more texts begging for one more favor, just space, silence, stillness. And in that stillness, I found something I didn't expect: peace. I enrolled in therapy. Not the virtual kind I could brush off, but real in-person sessions where someone looked me in the eyes and asked, "But what do you want?" I didn't always have an answer, but I liked being asked. I bought a bike and rode it on the weekends. I took long walks without checking my phone. I cooked new things that didn't involve microwaving sadness in a plastic container. I bought sheets that weren't on sale because they felt like something I deserved. I did all the small things I used to put off because I was too tired, too drained, too busy fixing everyone else's mess. And then there was David. He worked in the hospital cafeteria. I used to nod at him in passing, never giving it much thought. One day he asked me if I wanted to try the new soup he was experimenting with. I said yes. It became a habit. One bowl, one conversation, one step towards something unfamiliar but honest. He didn't know about my family at first, but when I told him, he didn't flinch. He didn't pity me or question whether I was being too dramatic. He just listened. Then he said, "I'm proud of you. Not for cutting them off, but for not letting it turn you bitter." That stayed with me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. I was someone who understood her limits and wasn't ashamed of them. I was someone who had finally learned that love without respect is just performance. And I wasn't performing anymore. One afternoon, David and I sat on my couch flipping through a local hiking guide. He pointed to a spot upstate with tall trees and a quiet lake. "Want to go next weekend?" he asked. I smiled. I didn't need to check my calendar. I didn't need to check my bank account. I just said yes. The trip wasn't elaborate. No plane tickets, no resort packages, no luxury upgrades. Just a packed lunch, 2 pairs of hiking boots, and enough space to breathe. We walked in silence for stretches, not out of awkwardness, but out of ease. And somewhere between the trees and the open sky, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't calculating what I owed or what someone would need from me next. I was just here, living, unburdened, and that more than anything felt like victory. I hadn't seen my mother face to face since the day she stood in my hallway clutching that folder of half-truths and failed justifications. I didn't expect to run into her, but life has a way of testing you just when you feel settled. It was early morning, and I had ducked into a quiet downtown cafe for espresso before my shift. Hoodie up, earbuds in, I was barely awake when I heard someone say my name. Abigail. I looked up. She stood there, smaller than I remembered. Not just physically. Her presence felt dimmed, like time had deflated the performance. She smiled, soft and tentative, like nothing had ever happened. Like we hadn't been to war with silence and invoices. "Can we sit?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded once. We sat at a corner table. She talked first. No real apology, just memory revision. "We were just trying to hold things together," she said. "We didn't realize how much you were carrying. If we could go back, maybe we'd do things differently." Her voice was low, carefully chosen, rehearsed. There was no mention of the stolen card, of Derek's scams, of the late-night voicemails meant to guilt me into obedience. Just vague regrets and gentle deflections. Then came the inevitable question. "Do you hate us now?" I didn't flinch. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No. But I don't owe you anything anymore." She blinked as if she hadn't expected an answer that simple, that calm, that final. "But we're family," she said, like it was an argument. "That's not an argument," I replied. "That's an excuse." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I didn't take it right away. She placed it on the table, stood up, and said, "I hope you'll come back to us someday." I looked at her, truly looked, and said, "I already did. To tell you, I'm not coming back." She hesitated, then turned and walked out. I sat there alone for a moment before opening the envelope. A check. $7.870. No note. No apology. Just a number on a line like closure could be purchased with exact math. I didn't cash it. Not then. I folded it once and slipped it into my bag. When I got home, I pinned it to the wall right beside the first one they sent. I didn't frame it. I didn't celebrate it. I just looked at it for what it was not. Redemption, not remorse. Just recognition that I had finally become someone they couldn't ignore. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel triumph. I felt centered, like I'd stepped out of a long, disorienting storm and was finally standing on solid ground. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her permission. I had already given myself everything I once begged, from them peace, clarity, and the right to walk away without shame. The check sat above my desk for nearly a week, pinned in place like a piece of evidence. Every time I walked past it, I glanced at the total $7,870, exactly the amount from my invoice down to the last dollar. It was precise, almost surgical. And that's what unsettled me. There was no message, no handwritten note, no apology tucked inside the envelope. Just money. A transaction without emotion, as if they believed returning what was never theirs in the first place could settle the emotional debt they never acknowledged. For days I debated what to do with it. I didn't need the money, not really. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I'd budgeted. I'd been careful. I'd worked overtime. That check wasn't a rescue, it was restitution decades too late and stripped of the humanity it owed me. Still, it was something. Not a gesture of love, but a silent admission that I had forced their hand. That they had no more arguments left, only dollars. I finally decided what to do with it after a long walk through the city past a community college where a small sign in the window caught my eye. Scholarships for first-generation healthcare students. I stood there for a long time, staring through the glass at a group of students huddled over books and coffee, their exhaustion heavy but hopeful. I saw myself in them, 10 years younger, 20 pounds lighter. No insurance, eating instant noodles at midnight while juggling textbooks and extra shifts just to keep the lights on. I went home that night, pulled the check from the wall, and deposited it. The next morning, I donated every single cent to the scholarship fund anonymously with one note: for the student who works through the night and still shows up for others in the morning. You are not invisible. You are not alone. It wasn't about being noble. It was about reclamation. That money had weighed on me in more ways than I realized. Accepting it without acknowledgement would have been another silence. Giving it away felt like carving my name into a space where someone else might find relief, a different kind of legacy than what my family tried to place on me. They could keep their guilt. I'd found my grace elsewhere. A few days later, I received a final voicemail from my father. His voice was low, controlled, like he was reading from a script he didn't quite believe in. "You've made your point, Abigail. You've embarrassed all of us. But family is not a transaction. You'll regret this." I deleted the message without hesitation. Because he was wrong. Family is a transaction when it's always been one-sided. When love is conditional. When loyalty is extracted like tax. I didn't regret my choice. I regretted not making it sooner. That check wasn't closure. It was confirmation. Proof that I had stopped begging and started demanding. And in their attempt to tie up loose ends, they handed me something more valuable than money: proof that even people who think they hold power can be held accountable when you stop playing by their rules. I thought things might settle after the check, that the finality of it would make them retreat into silence for good. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people who've built their lives on manipulation don't just give up, they regroup. What they didn't count on was that this time, I wasn't alone. A week after the donation, I got a call from Marissa. Her voice was calm but direct. "I wanted to let you know," she said. After I sent you that file, I also forwarded everything to a family law attorney and a contact at the state fraud office. Derek's officially under investigation. I blinked, stunned. For what exactly, I asked, though part of me already knew. Wire fraud, misappropriation of family funds, unauthorized access to joint assets, she said. And get this, he wasn't just using your card or mom and dad's emergency account. He was also skimming from their retirement fund. Thousands. My stomach turned, not out of sympathy for them, but out of a grim recognition that they had handed over everything to a man who'd proven time and again he couldn't be trusted. And then they punished me for refusing to do the same. They knew, I said quietly. They knew, and they covered it up. Marissa didn't hesitate. Yep, that's why I couldn't keep watching from the sidelines. You gave me the push I needed. I thanked her again, not just for the files, but for being the only person from that toxic orbit who chose truth over preservation. She wasn't just Derek's ex-wife anymore. She was a witness, a reckoning. A few days later, I got an email from an anonymous address. Attached was a company memo from Dad's employer. It was brief, professional, and definitive. William M. is no longer affiliated with our firm. No fanfare, no farewell message. Just gone. I didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching him fall, only the quiet confirmation that actions have consequences even when they're decades overdue. He tried calling me one more time. Voicemail again. You've made your point, Abigail, he said. You've embarrassed all of us. But family is not a transaction. You'll regret this. I didn't respond. Because I didn't regret any of it. What I regretted was the years I spent explaining myself, rationalizing their behavior, shrinking to fit their version of me. What I regretted was not seeing sooner that family without accountability is just control with nicer packaging. Justice didn't come through rage or revenge. It came through records, receipts, and restraint. It came from telling the truth, even when it was inconvenient. And when they realized they couldn't twist the narrative anymore, they lost the only leverage they ever had: my silence. What they called spite, I called sovereignty. What they called betrayal, I called boundaries. And what they called punishment, I knew was protection, finally choosing myself after a lifetime of being chosen last. Fall came quietly. The trees along my street turned gold and amber, the mornings crisp with that kind of air that makes you want to breathe deeper. I started waking up without dread. No voicemails waiting, no obligations disguised as family. Just my life, plain and unspectacular, but finally mine. David and I had grown close. We talked about moving in together, something simple, something bright. A place where no one knocked uninvited, no one guilted their way inside. When I told him the whole story beginning to end, he didn't try to fix it. He just said, "I'm proud of you for not letting it change your heart." And that was the difference. Everyone before him had wanted me to stay soft for their comfort. He wanted me to stay soft for my own. I kept the folder, the invoice, the emails, the check stub. Not out of spite, but to remind myself of how far I'd come. Not just away from them, but toward myself. I used to think strength meant endurance, tolerating, surviving, adapting. Now I know real strength is subtraction. It's the willingness to remove people, even family, who bleed you dry and call it love. It's the courage to walk away from roles you never auditioned for but were cast into out of convenience. One morning, I walked past a mirror and didn't recognize myself in a good way. My shoulders weren't hunched. My jaw wasn't clenched. I didn't look tired. I looked unburdened. I smiled and whispered, "There you are." That version of me had been waiting a long time to be seen. Weeks later, I found a birthday card in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, just 3 words written in slanted script. "And I see you." I knew instantly it was from Marissa, a woman who had nothing to gain but chose to stand beside me anyway. It felt like the universe reminding me that family isn't built on blood, it's built on truth and choice. She had chosen to show up when it mattered, and that meant more than decades of conditional loyalty ever could. It's been 6 months since I said no and never looked back. 6 months of quiet boundaries and deeper breaths. 6 months of cooking for joy, not survival. Of walking for peace, not escape. Of saying yes only when I mean it. I used to think love had to be earned through sacrifice. Now I know love doesn't demand your exhaustion. It protects your energy. It honors your voice. I don't tell this story to shame them. I tell it because there are people walking around with the same weight I once carried, thinking they're alone. They're not. I used to be the one they leaned on. Now I stand tall on my own, and the door I closed that day, it's still shut. Only now the key is in my pocket and it's staying there. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: love without respect is not love at all. Family should not be a cage you feel obligated to stay in, especially when the cost is your peace, your health, and your identity. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect your boundaries. You are allowed to walk away even when they call it betrayal. Because choosing yourself is not a crime, it's survival. I don't carry their shame anymore. I carry my healing. And I've learned that closure doesn't come when they finally apologize. It comes when you stop waiting for them to. I close the door not out of hate but out of love for myself. And I've never stood taller.